Turns out there's a whole nother level to the Canon R5. It's hidden in there, but let me talk about how standby low res can completely unlock your Canon R5. Canon really unlocked the Canon R5 with its firmware update 1.4.0. Now, that's been out for a little while. We do know at this point that that is a firmware update that allowed the Canon R5 to send and export an 8K RAW signal through its HDMI port up to a recorder like the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. And this is incredible because it completely unlocks so much of the potential of this camera. However, I discovered something kind of by surprise. I was so excited about the raw export capacity of this camera that I missed another incredible little update there that in my opinion has actually changed everything in how I shoot with the Canon R5, and that was standby low res. Now, standby low res is there in the RAW menu, and you implement it when you're shooting RAW. Now, the great thing about standby low res is essentially what it does, it takes your LCD screen on the back of your camera when you're exporting a RAW signal, and it gives you a lower res preview on the LCD screen as it's going up to the HDMI. What's great about this is this greatly solves the overheat problem on the Canon R5. If you know anything about the Canon R5, you know I have done many videos, I'll put them up here, talking about the overheating issues and hacks I've discovered to get around the overheating issue, and so many of them involve making sure the LCD screen and the EVF cut off. As a matter of fact, I've done so many tests where if you get those things off, you can actually get unlimited record time to your camera. Now, the downside of this is when you cut off your LCD and EVF, you don't have access to all those great menu things, touch autofocus, things like that, that I love on the Canon R5. So while those hacks work, they were always kind of a drawback to me. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about this standby low res and why I think it's so overlooked. And if you haven't been thinking about it, if you haven't been talking about it, you need to look at it and what it could mean for your Canon R5. Now, the first thing is this. This standby low res is absolutely incredible if you are shooting RAW. If you are a RAW shooter, if you've wanted a RAW camera, this is a major update because it completely, totally, 100% eliminates the overheating problem on the Canon R5. It is solved. There is no overheating problem on the Canon R5 anymore. You no longer need to black out the screen on HDMI out, which means you have unlimited RAW recording, and more importantly, you have full access to all your camera controls. You want to record a 8K or a 5K RAW interview for 3 hours and you want to make sure you're touching autofocus on the back, you can do it. Your camera will not overheat. You've literally gotten to the point now, if you want to shoot Canon R5 RAW, you're only limited by the size of your battery, which on all the stuff that has come out with the R5, to know that there's absolutely no overheating and you have full access to the camera, I think is incredible. It's amazing news. Now, in order to test this out, I decided to do a time test proving that this actually was true. Now, I don't have an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, I do have a Ninja 5, so what I did is I did a 5K RAW out test, which I believe this should work exactly the same with the 8K RAW as well. And what I did is I decided to set up my camera, exporting 5K RAW. I kept everything on my camera on, and more importantly, I then focused my camera on a movie that was switching films rapidly to make sure the autofocus was engaged the entire time I did it. And as you can see here, I did this, and what's incredible is as I ran this, it kept going, and it kept going, and with the back LCD screen on, with all access to all of my controls, I got over 3 hours of record time on the Canon R5. And what's great about this, I could have probably gone longer. I literally just got to 3 hours and thought I'd proved my point and I stopped it. The Canon was not overheating at 3 hours time. It just let me go, which told me I essentially have unlimited RAW with all the access and control of my camera. And this for me was so exciting because this is what I really, really wanted with the Canon R5 with all the hacks I've been doing where I had to cut off the screens. I always felt like I just wanted that back screen. Now I have it with no compromises. Unlimited raw output recording, no compromises on the Canon R5 thanks to this standby low res. So that is amazing. But there's another thing that I thought about. I don't honestly want to record in RAW that much. It's a huge file system. It requires a lot more post work. And sometimes I just want to shoot better. I love the 4K HQ on here. I love some of the other settings on this camera. And I wondered, what about standby low res in a non-RAW workflow? For instance, 4K HQ, 4K 60, all those things like that. But does 4K HQ and 4K 60, are they affected by this standby low res if I'm not shooting RAW? Well, what happened is after I got this firmware update, I started noticing a drastic improvement in my overheat times on my non-RAW recording in my camera. I was actually on set. I didn't even realize I had left standby low res on, and I was getting, in my opinion and my experience, huge improvements of the overheat times on my Canon R5. So I decided to come here in my studio. These aren't scientific tests, but I decided to be a little more controlled about it and check this out. So what I want to do is I want to do a test that kind of made sense to me in my real world setting. So when I'm on a set, I'll be honest, I'm always walking away from my camera, I'm setting lights, I'm checking blocking, talking to someone. My camera stays on for a very, very long time when I'm not shooting it. And the overheating components of the Canon R5 has always stressed me out because I always have to make sure my camera goes off, and then if I forgot because I got called away or did something, it overheats. And I've noticed some basic differences here in the low res. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do two tests on the Canon R5 in standby low res. So the first test that I want to do was just imagining that I'm kind of on set. I wanted to see the difference in standby low res versus it on and off just with the monitor on, not recording. And the reason why I did this is I know once you start recording, you do affect the overheat times, but I just wanted to see what the differences in my camera was between standby low res off and standby low res on if I just have it on in standby mode between shots just to see what the camera does. So for the first test, what I did is I basically took standby low res off, and as you can see here, the camera at 43 minutes, I got my first overheat warning, and then at 58 minutes, the camera cut off and it was no longer usable for me to use. So I was not able to use it after that 58-minute mark, which is pretty good, but remember, this is just in standby mode. There's nothing going on, no recording. I can basically keep the camera on for 58 minutes with that back screen on before the camera overheated without a single frame recorded. So what I did is I want to do another test now where I went and put standby low res on and check out the difference here. The camera's on and it's going and it's going and it's going and it's going. What I found really interesting is that the amount of time that it says on my camera I've left got down to 5 minutes, and then it just stayed there. It never went off. And as you can see here, I got 3 hours with no warning light on the Canon R5 in standby low res on in 4K HQ, which was awesome. And I know that when I start recording that will affect it, but what it tells me is that I can rest assured that when I'm in between takes, I'm not burning that precious, precious time I have with this incredible 4K HQ that's downsampling the AK sensor. This for me is a gigantic, massive, huge game saver. I can't even tell you how incredible this is. And for a fact, in a practical position, on set, it changes the amount of time I can get. I've actually been shooting mostly in 4K standard on a lot of stuff because it doesn't overheat ever, and now I've been able to access that beautiful 4K HQ on commercial shoots in a practical setting, and for me, that has completely changed everything I have about this camera. It has made this camera so much more useful and so much more practical. I have actually noticed in 4K 60, I can record longer when I have this on as well. And I didn't do a test on that, but I can just tell you practically I have discovered that. Now, the second test I wanted to do, which was I also thought very, very important, was this. I know that when you're recording RAW, the low res does not affect the RAW signal. But what I wanted to know is what does that do to the quality of my 4K HQ when I'm just recording standard. So what I have is I decided to do a second test where I took standby low res on and off and wanted to see internally and externally if that affected my 4K non-RAW signal. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so here we are. This is where things get really, really fun. I now have cut off RAW and I have a 4K HQ file. And the big thing here is I have a test here where the standby low res is off. Now, if you look here, I'm looking at this thing at full quality. I'm gonna blow it up to 400% here and really look, and you can really see, just as we'd expect, super, super crisp in our thing. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch on our standby low res to see the difference. So let's go ahead, we'll put it on, boom, we're there. And now what I want to do is I want to look at this difference. So let's come here, I'm going to look at this 400% again, and you can really see immediately, as you'd be expected, how much softer the detail is here. Now what I'm going to do, let's see if I hit record, if it changes it. Ready? I'm going to go ahead and hit record internally, and boom, look at that. The zero immediately, all these things became so much sharper the second I started recording internally on my camera, which was a great, great relief. And just to show it again, I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and cut it off again and look at the difference here. Boom, you can immediately see everything stopping up, hit record again, and bam. Once again, if you look here, all that crisp, beautiful detail comes. So if I hit record internally with the standby low res, it means that I get, the second I hit record on my Canon R5 internally, through the HDMI, I'm gonna get this beautiful, crisp footage, which is great. Okay, so there you go. You can see now why I'm so excited about standby low res for the Canon R5. This finally makes the R5 such a much more practical production video camera. And I can tell you, this isn't just random tests in my studio. This is real world tests out in the field. I've gotten so much more from my Canon R5. This standby low res, in my opinion, essentially gives me another camera because I can access this in such a different way than I could before. So I've personally been blown away by how much moisture use and more effectively the lower stress I can get from my camera in all of these real world situations. Now there is one thing you need to be aware of if you are using an external recorder to record your things. If you're using an external recorder, remember, if you're in a non-RAW format only, like 4K HQ, something like that, the quality will not change unless you hit record in camera, as those tests showed. So if you record primarily on an external recorder, remember, if you want to see that quality difference, you need to hit internal recording on the Canon R5 and then you'll instantly see that change. So for all my non-RAW shooters now, you cannot use the hack that I talked about earlier for unlimited like 4K HQ recording. The great thing is though, it still greatly extends the usable recording time on the Canon R5. If you still want to do unlimited 4K HQ recording, you're still going to have to cut off that back screen because of the difference in quality when you hit record. But if you're recording this on just a normal everyday things where you don't need unlimited 4K HQ, this is pretty incredible. And so in my opinion, this is just a game-changing update that finally makes the Canon R5 even more powerful than it really was. Much kudos to Canon for continuing to make these firmware updates that continue to unlock what this camera is. Anyway guys, I hope that was helpful. Please leave me any comments if you have any notes down below. I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, guys, go out there. I really hope you try this out. I'd love to hear what your experiences are with it. And yeah, go out there, keep on shooting, and yeah, I'll talk to you soon.